At the end of the street, on the edge of a dark forest, stood an old, abandoned hospital that had been empty for years. The townspeople avoided it. They said that at night, shadows could be seen in the windows, and sometimes the doors would slam shut by themselves. But I, Alex, had always thought these were just rumors until that night. That evening, rain fell slowly. The streets were wet, and the lamplight reflected in the raindrops. I was walking with a few friends, Michael, Emily, David, and myself. Emily had always been eager for scary stories. She suggested that we explore the abandoned hospital. At first, we laughed it off, but Michael said, "It could be fun, and we're all here anyway." Half an hour later, we were standing in front of the building. The walls were darkened by dampness, the paint peeled, and some of the windows were broken, while others were covered in dust. Even standing outside, a strange chill seemed to seep from within. The door was unlocked. We nudged it slightly, and the rusty hinges creaked loudly. As we stepped inside, a sharp, damp smell filled our throats. The lights didn't work. We moved forward using our phone flashlights. With each step, the floorboards groaned beneath us. On the walls hung old, faded photos of doctors and nurses who had once worked there. Oddly, some of the faces seemed to have been erased from the paper entirely. As we walked through the first floor, we could hear our voices, yet sometimes, even without speaking, footsteps echoed, as if someone was one step behind us. Emily stopped and whispered, "Guys, do you hear that?" No one answered, but we all had the same expression on our faces. Yes, we hear it, but we don't want to admit it. The hallways were narrow and long, the walls swollen from years of moisture. The light from our phones cast black shadows that seemed to move with every step. At one point, it felt as though we were standing in the middle of the hallway, and suddenly, the doors slammed shut behind us. The hospital's main corridor stretched endlessly. All the old clocks on the walls showed the same time, 3:15 a.m. I looked at my phone. It was 9:47 p.m. This alignment was not a coincidence, but I didn't say anything. As we moved further, the air grew heavier. Breathing became difficult, as though the oxygen was disappearing. David suddenly stopped and whispered, "Someone is watching us through that door." We all aimed our lights in that direction. The door was closed, but footsteps slowly faded from behind us. Each step increased our fear, yet there was no turning back. As we climbed the stairs, a cold breeze brushed my face. Doors lined the hall, and behind some, shadows seemed to shift. Emily, despite her fear, opened a room. It was almost empty except for an old wheelchair in the center. After closing the door, the wheels creaked as if moving on their own. Inside the room, the sound seemed to seep from the walls. Every step we took, I felt a presence breathing above us. We realized then that this building held more than shadows and old walls. Something was watching us. At last, we found a rusty door labeled Isolation Room. Opening it released a strong smell, dampness, rust, and old medicine. Inside there was only one bed, covered with old, tattered sheets. On the wall were scratch marks, like long, jagged fingernails. Michael stepped toward the center of the room and said, "Someone spent a lot of time here and didn't want to leave." David whispered, "No, they weren't allowed to leave." Suddenly, from under the bed came the sound of metal scraping wood. When we shone the flashlight, nothing was there. Yet at the foot of the bed, a shadow seemed to rise and disappear. We moved to the next hallway. My phone's clock again read 3:15 a.m. This time, All our phones showed the same time. It felt as though we were frozen in that exact moment. And every time the clock hit 3:15, the footsteps seemed to draw nearer. The third floor was even darker. One door had children's drawings, faded colors, and the people in them were faceless. Emily said, I can't breathe here anymore. Let's leave. But as we tried to reach the stairs, there was nothing there. No stairs, only a wall. We tried to run, but every hallway led us back to the same place. The footsteps were now right behind us. Yet when we turned, no one was there. Only the empty, dark corridor and the sound of our own breathing. Michael suddenly vanished. One moment, he was beside us, the next gone. Only the faint light of his flashlight flickered at the end of the hall. His voice echoed, but it seemed to come from inside the walls. "Don't leave. They're here." We screamed, but our voices were swallowed by the air. Around us, only the ticking of the clocks showing 3:15 a.m. could be heard. I don't remember how we got out that night. By morning, I found myself outside the hospital. Only Emily was beside me. David and Michael. No one saw them. The police came but found no one inside. On my phone, there was one last photo. 4 of us standing inside the isolation room. Behind us, in the window, a faceless silhouette stared directly at us. Since that day, I have never returned to that street. Because sometimes, at 3:15 a.m., I can hear footsteps by my bed, and in the faint light of the lamp, a shadow watches me.